The smell of ozone was thick in the air, tingling in the back of Connor's throat as he crouched behind the thick, cracked walls of the cavern. He hadn't anticipated finding himself here, in a vast alien ruin, trapped by a swarm of semi-sentient automatons and facing the unpredictable wrath of the very force that had brought him to this distant galaxy. The familiar hum of the power system echoed around him as he adjusted the pressure on his sidearm's trigger. "Come on," Connor muttered to himself, his voice barely above a whisper, "where the hell is she?" He scanned the room, moving cautiously from behind the rocks. He had never expected it to come to this. He'd always imagined this would be a mission of subtlety. A quiet extraction, maybe some strategic negotiation. But no, here he was, face to face with a race of hyper-intelligent beings that had decided human beings didn't quite measure up. Not for what they needed, anyway. It wasn't the first time he had faced this kind of adversity. Far from it. But this particular mission? It was a mess. His ears popped with the sharp screech of metal being torn apart. From his position, he could see the enormous door that led deeper into the ruins beginning to open. Of course, the other side of the door was where he really needed to go. But with the door wide open, that meant trouble was coming, and fast. A familiar voice crackled over his comm. "Connor," it said, breathless. "Get the hell out of there." Connor grimaced and glanced around. The sender of the message was his commanding officer, Commander Lena Myers, whose voice had always been a steady beacon in his chaotic life. Her tactical acumen was second to none. She had sent him on this mission in the first place, and here she was, reminding him of the consequences of failure. But something didn't sit right with the warning. "Did you send the extraction team?" Connor asked, already knowing the answer. There was a pause. The kind of pause that made him feel like something was very wrong. Lena's voice returned, firmer this time. "Negative. You're on your own. The fleet's pulling back. You'll have to figure it out." He let out a curse under his breath. "You've got to be kidding me." Of all the things he had expected, this wasn't it. The fleet pulling back? It didn't make sense. Connor checked his gear once more, reloading his rifle in preparation for the worst. He had always been taught that it was best to assume things would get worse before they got better. And, like clockwork, they did. The noise from the door grew louder, and as it opened wider, he could see a silhouette moving through the shadows, a figure approaching with the unmistakable fluidity of someone who had been through this kind of danger before. The figure wasn't alone. It wasn't just someone. It was someone, human. "Lena," Connor said, his heart skipping a beat. "Is that you?" Her figure emerged fully, standing tall in the dim light of the ruin, radiating the calm confidence that he had come to associate with Lena Myers. But there was something off about her. Her expression was grim, and her usual sense of command seemed absent. Her voice, when she responded, was low. "Get back, Connor." He didn't hesitate. He dived behind the nearest cover just as Lena fired off a round that tore through the air. He could hear the dull thunk of it hitting some sort of thick metal barrier on the other side of the door. There was no time to analyze what was happening. She moved with purpose, dodging and weaving as if the situation were as familiar to her as breathing. But even through the chaos, Connor could see something was wrong. Something very wrong. The automatons. There were dozens of them, each more menacing than the last. They were built from some kind of black metal, sleek and angular in design, with glowing red eyes that blinked with eerie precision. No one had ever quite figured out where they came from, but they sure as hell weren't native to this world. And they weren't exactly fond of humans. Lena didn't hesitate. She fired again. And again. Each shot was perfect, tearing through the machines with a lethal, practiced grace. Connor could see it now, the strange, unnatural rhythm of the battle. Lena was too focused. Her eyes were cold, her movements calculated. It wasn't like her. Something was off. He watched as Lena blasted a final automaton and stalked toward the next doorway, a grim smile on her face. She looked back at Connor, her eyes narrowing. "Ready to go?" she asked, her voice completely at odds with the situation. Connor blinked, his head swimming with confusion. "What the hell's going on? Why didn't you mention the extraction team?" Lena hesitated, only for a moment, then sighed. "You didn't think I would leave you stranded, did you?" Connor started to protest, but the words died in his throat as another, more ominous sound reached his ears. The grinding of metal. The shrieking of circuitry malfunctioning. Something was approaching, and whatever it was massive. The ruin itself seemed to shudder as the door ahead of them trembled and groaned. Something bigger was coming. But that wasn't the worst part. Lena turned back to face the door, her expression falling. They weren't supposed to activate yet, she muttered to herself. Connor felt his stomach drop. What's supposed to activate? Before she could respond, the door flew open with a deafening crash. The ground shook beneath their feet as an enormous, metallic creature emerged from the depths of the ruin. Its body was like a massive armored serpent, its sleek, segmented form shining in the dim light. And it was coming straight for them. "Well," Connor said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his veins, "that's not good." Lena's eyes flashed with a brief spark of panic before her face set into an expression of grim resolve. She was good under pressure, too good. But Connor had a feeling that the challenge they were about to face would test them both in ways they never expected. And this was just the beginning. The massive creature lunged, its segmented body slithering forward with unnatural speed. A series of blinding flashes erupted from its glowing, multi-lensed eyes, followed by a sharp burst of electrical energy that singed the air around them. Connor ducked instinctively, pulling Lena out of the way just in time to avoid the crackling wave of energy that surged past them, sizzling the rocks where they'd been standing. "Move!" Lena barked, shoving him forward. "We need to get to cover before it adapts." Connor barely had time to process what she meant. All he could think about was getting out of the line of fire as the beast's body shifted, its massive tail whipping through the cavern like a giant metallic whip. The rumbling sound it made shook the entire structure, dust falling from the ceiling as the automaton's movements grew more aggressive. But Lena was already sprinting toward the far side of the cavern, and Connor followed her lead. She was relentless in her speed, her body moving with the precision of someone who knew how to handle herself in a crisis. He could hear her muttering something under her breath as they rounded a corner, slipping into the relative safety of an alcove. "Okay, think," she muttered, her brow furrowing. "It's the core. If we destroy the core, the whole system will collapse. But getting close is." The ground trembled again, and the noise of the creature's approach was deafening. Lena turned to Connor, her eyes flashing with urgency. "If we can't take it down from here, we'll have to find another way. I'm not losing anyone else." Connor swallowed hard. "We won't." He wasn't sure if it was for her sake or his own that he said it, but there was no time for doubt. The creature's massive head crested the top of the alcove, its jaws snapping open with an eerie, almost mechanical hiss. It was too close now. Its cold, metallic teeth gleamed in the dim light. Lena didn't hesitate. She pulled a small device from her belt, a nondescript metal box with a few switches and buttons. She set it on the ground, activating the detonator, and quickly turned to Connor. "Cover me," she said. Before he could ask what she was doing, the ground beneath them trembled violently again, this time with a deeper force. A shockwave swept through the air as if the very walls were alive, responding to some unseen force. The air crackled with the sound of something huge, something fast, heading straight for them. Connor fired his weapon without thinking, sending bursts of energy towards the automaton's head. They barely seemed to make a dent. The creature didn't flinch. But Lena didn't seem to care. She was already on the move again, darting towards the distant structure at the center of the ruin, the heart of the machine. Connor gritted his teeth and ran after her. He could feel his pulse pounding in his temples, the adrenaline making his limbs feel heavier with each passing second. "Get to the core!" Lena shouted over her shoulder, as though it was the most obvious thing in the world. "That's the only way." He didn't need any more encouragement. He pushed himself harder, ducking and weaving around the collapsing debris and the flashes of energy sizzling past them. The sound of mechanical screeches and heavy footsteps echoed behind them, growing louder. The beast was on their tail, closing the distance. The core, as Lena had called it, was located in the center of the ruin's deepest chamber. The chamber was vast, with walls that appeared to stretch endlessly, filled with strange symbols and alien technology that Connor couldn't begin to comprehend. There was something ominous about it. The entire structure seemed to hum with energy, and the air itself felt thicker the closer they got to the center. Lena reached the platform first. She leaped onto the structure, her hands already working quickly to open a panel embedded in its surface. The intricate mechanism glowed beneath her touch, and she muttered a few words to herself as she worked to pry it open. Behind them, the creature's terrifying screech rang out. It had found its way into the chamber, and it was coming fast. "Lena!" Connor shouted, his heart in his throat. "We don't have much time." She glanced over her shoulder for a fraction of a second, but didn't stop working. "You're gonna have to hold it off," she said, voice tight. "I'm almost there." "Damn it," he muttered, reaching for his rifle again. He fired off a few more shots, trying to target the beast's weak points, but it was like shooting a tank. Nothing was slowing it down. The creature's glowing red eyes locked onto him as it charged forward, its speed almost too much to track. Connor knew it was only a matter of seconds before it was on them. He quickly ducked behind a piece of rubble, using it for cover as he watched the creature's massive jaws snap open, ready to crush him. "Lena!" Connor yelled, his breath quickening. "It's coming!" But Lena didn't reply. She was focused, her face a mask of concentration as she worked her way through the alien technology. She was going to get them both killed if she didn't hurry. The creature's body shifted, and Connor saw an opening. It was going to dive straight at him. Without thinking, he sprinted out from behind cover, launching himself toward the beast's side. He fired off a few shots, distracting the creature just long enough to evade its jaws, but the momentary relief was short-lived. Connor made it to the platform where Lena was working, just as the creature's tail lashed out. He managed to duck under it, but the force of the strike sent him sprawling. He rolled to the side, pushing himself up with a grunt of pain. The beast was moments away from crashing into the platform. "Lena, now!" he screamed, gritting his teeth as he took another step forward. With a final, desperate push, Lena pulled the final lever, and the device inside the core activated. A series of loud clicks echoed through the chamber, followed by an electrical whine that seemed to tear through the air itself. Then, nothing. Silence. For a moment, Connor didn't know if they had succeeded, if they had survived or failed. He saw Lena stand still, her expression unreadable. Then, all at once, the room seemed to light up with a blinding burst of energy. The massive creature halted in its tracks, its glowing eyes flickering as it faltered. The hum of the core surged through the chamber as the alien technology began to collapse in on itself. The beast convulsed, spasming as the light around it intensified. Then, with a massive, mechanical scream, it crumbled, its body falling apart in a cascade of sparks and shattered metal. Lena stumbled back, breathing heavily. "It's done," she said, her voice hoarse. Connor wiped the sweat from his brow, allowing himself a brief moment of relief. But even as the danger seemed to fade, a nagging feeling lingered in the back of his mind. The core had been deactivated, but not without consequences. "I don't think we're out of the woods yet," Connor said, glancing at Lena. "That thing. It wasn't the only one." Lena turned to him, her eyes narrowed in thought. "I know. But we've got bigger problems now." The strange hum in the air around them seemed to grow louder. The ruin wasn't finished with them yet. The air crackled with an unsettling hum as the energy in the cavern shifted, like the ruin itself was waking up. The creature's final collapse had only been the beginning. Connor could feel it, deep in his bones. The ground beneath his feet felt too unstable, as if it might give way at any moment. The structure, once ancient and dormant, was now alive with energy, thrumming in a way that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "Get moving!" Lena snapped, her voice sharp and urgent. She didn't wait for a reply, already pulling herself up onto the ledge of the platform, her movements fluid as ever. She was a woman of action, and when it came to survival, she knew what needed to be done. Connor was learning fast that in her world, hesitation meant death. He joined her quickly, scanning the vast chamber for any signs of additional threats. The once ominous, mechanical beast was gone, but the ruin was far from silent. If anything, it was more alive now than ever. The walls pulsed with an unnatural energy, and the strange symbols that lined the stone surfaces had begun to glow brighter, casting eerie shadows across the room. "I don't like this," Connor muttered under his breath, instinctively checking his weapon and making sure the remaining power cells were still intact. "It's not over." "Not by a long shot," Lena said, her eyes scanning the chamber. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before this place goes full meltdown. If we don't get out of here now, we're both toast." 5 minutes. A lifetime. Connor's pulse quickened as he glanced around the massive, cavernous space. The only way out was back the way they'd come, but the creature had destroyed the path leading to their initial escape route. They had no choice but to take the deeper corridor, the one that led straight into the heart of the ruin, where, Lena suspected, the true danger was waiting. "Can you get us to the exit?" Connor asked, his voice tense but focused. He didn't need to ask Lena if she could, it was more of a statement. She was good, probably better than anyone he knew, and yet... this place? It felt different. It felt like it had a will of its own, and that will wasn't on their side. "Maybe," she replied cryptically, "but first we have to find the central nexus. If we can't shut this thing down at the core, we won't be able to leave. The entire structure will collapse in on itself, and we'll be trapped in the middle of it." "Sounds reassuring," Connor said, his voice dry. But there was no time for sarcasm. No time to second-guess anything. They had one shot at this, and they needed to make it count. Lena moved first, her boots silent on the rocky floor as she advanced toward the far end of the chamber, where a large archway loomed. The arch was covered in strange glyphs and ancient alien markings, none of which made any sense to Connor, but Lena was already studying them, her brow furrowed in thought. "What is this place?" Connor asked, his voice heavy with the weight of their situation. "These ruins, they're not like anything we've seen before. What was it used for?" Lena hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." "Try me," Connor said, following her through the arch. Lena gave him a sideways glance, her lips pressed in a tight line. "It's a weapon. An ancient weapon designed to rewrite the fabric of space itself. This whole place was meant to manipulate gravitational fields, energy sources, and even the dimensions themselves. A tool of mass destruction." Connor's stomach tightened as the full weight of her words sank in. "So, we're running from a weapon of mass destruction?" "Pretty much," Lena replied, moving faster now. "Except it doesn't just destroy. It manipulates. That's why it's still running. The core wasn't designed to be shut down, at least not without catastrophic consequences. We don't just need to stop it, we need to contain it." They turned a corner, entering another vast room that felt like a labyrinth of alien architecture. The walls were lined with more of the glowing symbols, and strange mechanical arms extended from the ceiling, their purpose unknown. "Contain it?" Connor asked, eyes wide as he took in the disorienting scene. "How the hell are we supposed to do that?" Lena didn't answer immediately. She was moving through the maze, her eyes scanning the walls, her fingers tracing the strange symbols with careful precision. Her expression was grim, but there was a spark of something, determination, maybe even hope, that hadn't been there before. "If we're lucky," Lena finally said, "there's a failsafe in the central nexus. It was designed to seal off the weapon if it was ever activated without proper authorization. We just have to find it before everything goes to hell." They rounded another corner, and this time, the hallway opened up into a vast, circular chamber, far larger than anything they had seen so far. At the center of the room stood a massive, pulsating orb of pure energy, crackling with arcs of lightning that seemed to leap off the surface of the orb and sizzle through the air. It was a beautiful and terrifying sight. The orb was the heart of the ruin. The core. That's it, Lena said, her voice taut with urgency. That's what we need to shut down. Connor felt a bead of sweat trickle down his forehead. He had no idea how they were going to take it down. It looked alive. The energy radiating from it was unlike anything he'd ever felt, a constant shifting force that seemed to be alive with purpose, almost sentient in nature. How do we destroy that thing? Connor asked, his heart pounding in his chest. If it's alive, it might fight back. Lena looked up at the orb, her eyes narrowing. She was quiet for a long moment, studying it like a puzzle she wasn't quite sure how to solve. Then, with a deep breath, she spoke. We don't destroy it, she said, her voice low. We contain it. And we need to hurry. The longer we wait, the more this place adapts to us. It's already learning how to react to our presence. If we don't stop it soon, it'll be too late. Connor's mind raced. They couldn't afford to hesitate. Every second that passed, the ruin was changing, adapting, becoming harder to escape from. Lena sprinted forward, reaching for the glowing orb, her fingers brushing the surface just as a high-pitched whine filled the chamber. The orb seemed to react to her touch, flashing brighter as if aware of her presence. Shit, Lena cursed under her breath. It's already responding. And then, as if it had been waiting for her to make a move, the ground shook violently. The walls seemed to ripple, and the ceiling above them groaned as if it were about to collapse. A massive mechanical arm shot out from the side of the chamber, its sharp claws aimed directly at them. Connor, get down! Lena shouted. Connor dove to the side as the mechanical arm sliced through the space where they had been standing just moments before. The force of its strike sent debris flying, and he could hear the distinct crackle of something breaking in the distance. We need to contain this now. Lena shouted, her voice strained. It's too smart, it's figured out we're trying to shut it down. Connor could see the mechanical arm retracting, but more were coming. The orb's glow intensified, sending arcs of energy flaring outward. It was evolving faster than they could keep up. And they were running out of time. The mechanical arms were closing in, their movements swift and calculated, almost as if the ruin itself were hunting them. The energy in the room seemed to grow hotter, more oppressive with each passing second. Every instinct in Connor's body screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. Not anymore. Lena! Connor shouted over the roar of the shifting machinery. How do we stop it? Lena's face was tight with concentration as she moved toward the pulsating orb at the center of the chamber. The energy crackling around it made her look almost fragile, like a moth flying too close to a flame. But she wasn't scared. She was focused. Driven. And for a moment, Connor felt a surge of respect for her, the kind of respect that only came from watching someone work in the direst of circumstances. I don't know. Lena yelled back, her voice full of strain. This thing isn't just a machine. It's alive, Connor. It's got its own defense mechanisms. We need to disrupt its energy flow, but it keeps shifting its form. Connor's eyes darted around the chamber. The mechanical arms were retracting, preparing for another strike, while the orb in the center pulsed violently, sending waves of energy cascading out from its surface. The ground was shaking beneath their feet, and the air was thick with the crackle of unstable power. They didn't have much time. Wait, he said suddenly, his heart skipping a beat as an idea hit him. The core. You said the core has a failsafe. What if it's linked to the system? Could we overload it? Lena turned toward him, her eyes flashing with the same determination he had seen earlier. She was always thinking 3 steps ahead, but this time, she didn't have all the answers. This was new territory, even for her. That might work, she said slowly, her voice weighing the possibilities. But it could backfire. If we overload it too much, we risk bringing the entire structure down. We need to make sure the failsafe doesn't activate prematurely. Connor's mind raced. They didn't have time for caution anymore. The mechanical arms were closing in again, and this time, there was no escape if they didn't act fast. Do it, he said, his voice hard. We don't have a choice. Lena didn't argue. She was already moving. She reached into her pack, pulling out a small device with a series of flashing lights. She slapped it onto the surface of the orb, its energy reacting instantly. The orb flared bright, a brilliant, blinding light that caused the room to feel like it was on the edge of exploding. Cover me! Lena shouted. I need a few seconds to get the trigger in place. Seconds. That was all they had. Connor didn't hesitate. He spun around, raising his weapon, and fired several rounds into the incoming mechanical arms. Sparks flew from their joints, but they didn't stop. The arms were too well built, too resilient. Still, they slowed down, just enough for him to have a chance. He kept firing, targeting the joints and the central hubs, anything that might stop them in their tracks. His pulse hammered in his chest, his breath ragged, but he couldn't stop now. Not when Lena was so close to the solution. A loud crash echoed as one of the arms finally crumpled under the barrage of fire, its claws falling uselessly to the ground. But more arms were coming. He needed to buy Lena more time. Lena, meanwhile, was working furiously at the orb's surface. Her fingers flew across the controls as the core continued to pulse and hum. She cursed under her breath, muttering something about calibration, about timing. The device she had attached to the orb began to spark, its lights flashing rapidly. Lena! Connor yelled. Hurry! I'm trying, she shouted back, her voice strained. This thing is adapting faster than I can keep up with. Connor fired another round, sending an arm crashing to the ground, but more were closing in, moving faster now. The chamber itself felt like it was coming alive, the walls groaning under the strain as the energy from the orb surged outward. The ground beneath their feet quaked violently, and Connor's stomach dropped. The entire structure was on the verge of collapse. There was no way out, no way to escape the devastation if they didn't stop it now. But then, just as the last mechanical arm neared them, Lena's voice cut through the chaos. It's done, she shouted. The orb flared one last time, sending out a wave of brilliant white light that flooded the chamber. Connor shielded his eyes, his heart pounding in his ears. The entire world seemed to go silent in that moment. And then, with a tremendous, resounding crack, the light around the orb shattered. The energy flow stilled. The humming sound of the ruin, the very pulse of the core, ground to a halt. The mechanical arms stopped in their tracks, mid-swing, frozen in time. For a long moment, neither of them moved. They were both too stunned to speak, too unsure if they had really succeeded or if this was just another trick of the machine. And then, slowly, Lena turned to Connor, her expression softening for the first time since they had entered the ruin. We did it, she said, her voice barely a whisper. But it was enough. It was victory. Connor took a deep breath, finally allowing himself to relax. It wasn't over yet, they still had to get out of the ruin before it collapsed entirely, but the immediate danger was gone. They had succeeded. Against all odds, they had won. I didn't think we were going to make it out of here, he said, his voice shaky but filled with relief. That was close. Lena smiled, a rare expression on her face, though there was a sharp edge to it. If you'd listened to me from the start, we wouldn't have had to make it this close, she teased, her voice light despite the danger they'd just faced. Connor chuckled, shaking his head. Yeah. I'll admit it. You were right. But I'm not sure I'm ready to start trusting your plans entirely yet. Lena's eyes glinted with humor. Don't worry. You'll learn. And then, with a final glance at the now stilled core, they turned and began to make their way toward the exit. The cavern was still shaking, the structure groaning as if protesting their escape, but the worst was behind them. They were going to make it.